All Things Data podcast. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science and data-driven strategies to enable digital transformation. The hosts are Dr. Manjeet Roehrig, Associate Professor of Data Science, and Dan Yarmoluk, Director of Business Development of IoT and Data Science.
My name is Manjeet Roehrig, your co-host for the show, and I'm joined by Dan Yarmoluk, who will introduce our guest for today. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Manjeet. It's great to be here. We got a great guest today, the Head of Strategy for Cognizant Digital, Paul Roehrig. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, guys. Glad to be here.
Well, Paul, with all our guests that are very interesting, got a great business background, a great digital background, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your journey.
It's been a fun journey. It might not be the most traditional journey you ever hear about. So I actually started as a musician. So I was a professional musician for many years. I became more and more interested in technology because I was using technology to make music. Then the more I learned about technology, I had also done some teachings, music teaching, and the more I learned about technology, the more I thought, well, hey, there's probably a way to combine these interests of music and teaching and technology. And so I started looking around for a graduate program, and I found one. And so I got a master's degree in instructional design, development, and evaluation. I had a good time doing that, so I stuck around for a PhD in that. But I also was able, they were very kind to me, and they let me pull in different kinds of classes from technology and communications and a big focus on management science. And after that, I went into internal consulting for big technology services companies, and I worked for Compaq and then Hewlett-Packard, where I was working on big services deals. I had a lot of fun doing that, but I wanted to get back into writing and research and trying to understand more about the broader market. And then I worked for Forrester Research, and I was one of the principal analysts there. I had a really good time doing that as well, and I learned a lot more about the big technology services companies that were doing really cool and interesting things. And I got to meet everybody and learned really a lot. And I had to focus on what was going on with Cognizant. The leadership team at Cognizant was and is fantastic, and really was excited with how they were not only succeeding in the current market, but thinking about the future. And so I came to work for Malcolm Frank, who was the head of strategy and marketing, who now heads up all of Cognizant Digital Business. And we founded this Center for the Future of Work, and we hired people like Ben Pring and Rob Brown and Ewan Davis and Manish Bal, and we put together this small global team of people thinking about the future of all kinds of business and work, and then going out into the field and working with clients, Cognizant clients, to help them imagine and plan and implement their own future of work at the enterprise level. And so I did that for about 7 years. And about 2 years ago, I took the strategy job for Cognizant Digital Business. And that's where I am today.
So that's a fascinating journey, Paul. I mean, I've heard other more usual paths, but coming from a background of music into IT and digital transformation, it's a real great journey. Just out of curiosity, have you looked at the applications of AI deep learning these days to music, where AI is generating music? And I just wanted to get your feel about what do you think about that?
That's a really good question, and thank you for asking that. That's the first time. I think a lot about that. I listen to what's created, and you're one of the first people to ask that question. So first of all, it's amazing, right? The idea of how data is being deployed with artificial intelligence and machine learning and other technologies to generate things, whether it's movement or some sort of adaptation or art and some painting or some kind of music. It's phenomenal, and I think it shows it's a fantastic use case for the edge of where machines are beginning to do more and more of nearly every human thing. That said, right, it's phenomenal and a wonderful use case, but the music that's created, man, it just doesn't sound that good, right? We're still very early days in terms of trying to have machines create art. And then it's speculation on my part, but I don't think it will ever really create art. I think it will supplement the creation of art, and you're seeing phenomenal use of that as technology becomes more and more embedded into how people compose and record and perform. And that, I think, is the more likely future. But the music that's like generated by I think the name of the song was like Daddy's Car or something, that the machine actually quote unquote rote. I think we're a long way from, deep learning and AI generated music to, the Beatles or Jacob Collier or Mozart or John Coltrane or Elvis Costello. I think those folks are, we need those creative outliers, and I don't think the machines are ever going to catch up to them.
Yeah, I think one of the first efforts in AI generating music, I think it was a project called Songbird.ai. I think the code is still available on the number of online resources for people to generate music. And I completely agree with you that, in terms of the output, it is not the same as what a human would generate. And for any art, right? And there's a human element to that. If you look at, I think there's even examples of text getting generated by AI, but the way a human would write and express sentiment through text, I think that part is missing even in the textual writing as well.
It's an interesting point, too, I think, that you're bringing up. I think we're very much in the early days of describing or figuring out together what is an ideal balance between humans and machines. And for AI, and maybe you guys have an interesting take on this, but it's something I've been wondering about. AI, we hold AI up to the standard that we use is it has to replace a human. Like if we can just get this machine to be something close to a person, how people write music or write text or solve a problem. And I wonder if that's correct. I wonder if that seems to me to be almost an artificial barrier. Like we want to replace a human brain with a silicon brain, quote unquote. Right. I just don't know if that's the best way forward because a machine.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. I think my take on that would be instead of artificial intelligence replacing a human intelligence, it could perhaps be a human intelligence enabled by something artificial in this case, which could be augmented intelligence overall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in our second book, What to Do When Machines Do Everything, we call that enhancement, but augmentation, it's the exact right concept. It's how humans engage with new technologies. Where the high watermark shouldn't be, I think, passing the Turing test, where it tricks you, right? So the robot is so good that we think it's a human for a minute. First of all, I don't think people really want to be tricked by robots and or artificial intelligence. And second of all, I'm not sure that's the best use of the technology, and I'm really certain it's not the best use of humans, who we're really good at creativity, judgment, empathy. We know, we wake up wondering about a question we have. We wake up feeling like we want to make art, and machines just don't do that. And I don't think they're going to do that anytime soon. And I think you're exactly right. It's the idea of a human being enhanced or augmented by these phenomenal new technologies. That becomes the real path forward, I think.
Paul, I often think about it the same way. I read that this Japanese short story that was created by AI won an award. And then they had a Netflix film that was all AI generated, and I watched it, and I couldn't watch it. It was just not linear. It was all over the board. But then I see things like 3D printing and material structures being created that were just not thought of by the human brain, that seem to be structurally sound and extremely creative. It just makes me wonder when I'm looking at automating certain kinds of parts of the solution and obsessed with these small areas of automation that are inches that gain yards, that mean something after a while. I kind of agree with you that I don't know if it's just that it's not there yet, or and that holy grail we're waiting for 10 years out, or like you're saying, it's mislabeled or misinterpreted somehow. So it's pretty interesting.
Exactly.
So, Paul, maybe you could tell us a little bit, like when you were talking about Ben and the future of work, and I've had a few conversations with him. I mean, how is Cognizant with what you're, being tasked with and directionally, different than it was, of Cognizant in the past?
That's a great question. We have a relatively new CEO, and that's obviously a critical juncture in the evolution of the firm. But several years ago, and all credit, I think, at that point to Malcolm Frank and Frank D'Souza, for seeing that in the digital economy, and at that point it was the beginnings of the digital economy, but in the early days of what the World Economic Forum calls the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the ideas about the future were probably one of the most critical assets. We had phenomenal technologies, but the thinking about how should a company or a person embrace those ideas? How should you even think about where does automation fit? And what is enhancement or augmentation. What even are those things? Because we were moving from an era of physical enhancement, physical augmentation, to an era of knowledge enhancement. So, and that is a profound shift in society and economy and how businesses run, how value is created, how stocks are valued. That the impact of that shift is just massive. And back at when we founded the Center for the Future of Work, that was still feeling, somewhat speculative. That was not a certainty at that point. But the Center for the Future of Work, they're tasked with being out on the front edge of things. So what's the next? Right? So not just how do I build a strategy for the next 3 or 4 or 6 quarters, but how do I think about configuring a firm for the next 3 years or 5 years? So the event horizon is a little bit farther out. And by doing that, by creating a crucible for fresh ideas and fresh thinking, what you do is you help clients. That's the ultimate goal, is you help clients work back. So if there's a future state of a bank or a life sciences company or anything, any kind of firm, then if you can imagine the future, make a plausible future, it's not science fiction. We're not talking, 50 years out. It's like 3 or 4 or 5 years out, and then work backwards. Then you can create, a quote unquote a North Star, a strategic North Star, but then you have a navigational path to get there. So if the Center for the Future of Work and the ideas that come out of an engine like that are pushing the envelope, and sometimes they're going to be right, and sometimes we're going to be wrong, but by and large, the research is good and the thinking is good. So by and large, it tends to be more right than wrong, and it helps clients imagine backwards. So if the future is this, how do we get there? And that's where Cognizant, over the past few years, has really evolved and adapted to serve the creation of a modern enterprise. Because every company in every region and every sector recognizes now that this shift it's no longer theoretical. It's absolutely happening. And you're seeing how value generation is changing, how boardrooms are changing, how C-suites are evolving, all in line with the creation of new economic value based on new technologies. And so if the Center for the Future of Work is the engine for the ideas of imagining the future, then Cognizant is absolutely adapting to help clients modernize their enterprise. And a lot of that is driven by what digital business does, what our operations group does, and then the foundational technologies that are delivered by digital systems and technologies. And so whether it's Cognizant or another firm, all of the major service providers are moving in somewhat of a similar direction. But our firm is really relentlessly focused on how do you help clients create a modern enterprise that is driven by human experiences, formed by beautiful software, running on data and applied intelligence, and then managing that on an infrastructure of connected things and cloud, 5G network connectivity, and so on and so forth. So Cognizant is absolutely adapting in line with what clients need, but what clients need not just today, but what they'll need not just 1 quarter out, 2 quarter out, 3 quarter, a year, 2 years, and 3 years.
Yeah, and Paul, this really is kind of an interesting point, because I find, Manjeet runs the Center of Applied AI at the University of St. Thomas here in Minneapolis. I'm doing a lot of automation in the industrial IoT, but I do find it like I lean towards the future of work in those writings and when machines do everything. And this holistic digital helix, that we're referring to is kind of sometimes siloed into massive amounts of data and machine learning. And I think it's missing the point of all the other exponential things happening at the same time and how humans will interact. And you see this with the hyper digital, employees that you have versus traditional employees. And I think sometimes we're missing the signal from the noise. And I do think that the work that you guys are doing in the future of work and others that are thinking about it is much more nuanced, process people, a transitionary period to a future state period. And I think some people are just missing that a little bit. I think they're trying to pin it on one thing, like it's AI, which is, to me, not the way. That's not everything. That's part of it. It's a big part of it. There's no doubt about it. But it's just, there's a lot of other things flowing to make this future human state, as we're talking about. I don't know if I'm articulating it properly, but I feel like that,
Oh, yeah. Well, I think your feeling is exactly right on. And I think your feeling is, honestly, you're tapped into not only the zeitgeist of what we're hearing from clients, but also the level of technology that exists right now and is likely to exist over the next few years. If you think of any major process in your life or in a business or an enterprise, there's always, a human in the loop. There's a human experience somewhere. Even if it's, e-commerce, there's a person buying something. Banking, right? There's somebody, it's a person's bank account. It's not a machine's bank account. The machines help it and they nurture it and they provide management, but there's still a human in the loop, right? Even complex mechanical systems like a car. We all talk a lot about, driverless cars, but there's always a human in the loop. And the technical requirement to get from mostly autonomous to fully autonomous, where there's no driver needed, that's just remarkably difficult. And it's fraught with regulatory challenges, legal challenges, insurance challenges, right? There's just infrastructure challenges, a huge technical heavy lift. And so we could wait for that, or we could say, look, we're here, we're not going anywhere, and we're going to stay a part of the value stream of most business processes. And once you conclude that, then it becomes actually a lot simpler to figure out a path forward, because now you're engineering around what humans want and humans need. And if you truly understand that, then you can build beautiful software that people are going to use. They're going to want to use it, right? So you're not going to build, an enterprise application that just sits somewhere unused. And there's a lot of those, unfortunately. But that software needs to be tied to human experiences, running on applied AI, right? So once you orient around the human experience, all the technical elements come into service of that human experience that will drive growth or drive cost reduction, whatever you're looking for. Then it makes a whole lot more sense. You're connecting software to applied intelligence, to data coming from things or databases or any source, really, and then running on a truly efficient foundational technology structure. Then you've got really the new technology stack that runs from a business outcome through a human experience, through software, through applied intelligence and data, and then into a foundational structure of technology. I think you're exactly right on around that.
Well, I know this is an overused word, Paul, but can you define, or how you would, what is your thoughts around digital transformation?
It starts with what is digital, right? So digital has become such I would say, overused term in some ways that warrants some discussion about what are we talking about when we say digital. So I look back at history. So if you think back, some time ago, we used to call things like an electric light, or an electric lamp. And I've looked at old advertisements from that era when electric lighting was just coming in, and it was electric light or electric lamp or electric washing machine. So at that period, we used that modifier electric because there were a lot of lights and lamps that weren't electric, right? They were candles or gas lamps, and the washing machine was, usually it was a human that was washing something by hand. And so we called it electric lights, electric blender, electric washing machine. And we did that for some time. But we did that until most of the lights were not, gas or candles. They were electric. And so we dropped it. We said, okay, it's a light. And now we say light. We don't say electric light. We just say light bulb. We don't say electric lamp. And I feel like my hypothesis is that right now digital is kind of we're in the same kind of interregnum where the technologies had grown so powerful, so fast that a few years ago they started doing things that weren't familiar to us. Like they were talking back and robots were walking around and cars were starting to drive themselves a little bit. And the cloud became mainstream. So there were these systems that may have existed for years, but they became so powerful and so ubiquitous. And the use cases in industry and our personal lives just kept growing and growing and growing that we needed a modifier because it wasn't just technology. It was doing a whole new different thing. And so we said, digital. We're going to call it digital. And so we are right now in that period where calling something digital means it's technology, but it's doing much more powerful and impactful things. It's changing societies, it's changing companies, it's changing how economies work, it's changing how elections happen and how our psychology works. It's changing a lot of things. And so we put a big bow around all of that stuff and we're calling it digital. And I think that new technology for applied business and applied impact to our human lives, we're probably going to keep using that word digital, but I fully expect at some point that's going to go away, just like for the same reason we don't call things electric lamps anymore. So I think that transformation of turning on new technologies, particularly in a business context, to drive growth, to drive valuation increase, and to drive cost containment, that process by process, experience by experience, like we were talking about a minute ago, that is true digital transformation, not, in its, I think, in an honest, authentic sense.
Yeah, fantastic. The one thing that plagues me in getting funding for certain programs or initiatives with traditional organizations is that it is different from other. So why is it different than other historical kind of tried and true processes? And how do we look at things like this traditional valuation or ROI on a project while undergoing digital transformation? Because some of this stuff, like when you call it the next, that you have to go there. At the same time, it doesn't have that traditional ROI formulaic, I'm going to get my payback period right away. But if you don't go there, you feel like you're missing the boat. So how do we deal with this in this transitionary phase?
Yeah, that's another great question. So one of the things that we've observed and, actually we counsel against is, we'll work with someone who will have a very broad vision of how technology should impact the firm. Like we're going to make some sort of, massive system, and it's going to be like Google, and it's going to change everything overnight. We're going to it may take us a while to build it, but we're going to change everything. And I call that a God bot. And trying to build a God bot for a business outcome is a really risky bet. And and to your point, it's very difficult to justify economically. Unless you're Google, or unless you're Netflix or LinkedIn or Microsoft, where that's what you do. I think the better play and the more easily justifiable play is to get back where, Dan, your question about the human experience, putting the humans at the center of this, that's extremely relevant. Because if you focus on a specific business process, it could be in your, middle or back office if you're a bank. It's the work that you do internally or a consumer or client experience, and focus on that, right? Say we want to improve how we do claims adjudication in an insurance space. That's a very specific, human-oriented, data-intensive, high-volume, generally replicated, parts of it are replicated process that would be a really good target in many cases for applying new technologies to drive down cost, improve customer experience, and so on and so forth. That becomes a much more justifiable ROI. So I describe it as boiling a single cup of water. As a business cliche, we don't want to boil the ocean, right? Let's not boil the ocean. But then, most people, they still want to boil the ocean. And by casting too broad a net on what we're calling quote unquote digital transformation, that you're right, that is really difficult to justify because it takes a long time, and it's candidly quite risky unless that's your core competency. The more direct and justifiable way ahead is pick up a cup of water and boil that. Pick one process, one experience that meets the criteria for as a likely candidate to be changed and modernized, and focus on that. And that you can get a much more clear ROI if you're saying, I'm going to improve this claims adjudication process, or I'm going to create this point of sale loan offering running on AI, or I'm going to create a new business model by sensor enabling my factory equipment. Those are much more straightforward to justify and deliver an ROI in a timely manner, right? Because businesses don't want, if you're going to invest, you want a payback, right? That's part of the deal. So I think avoid building a God bot, focusing on a human experience that's data intensive, replicable, high volume, costs a lot. That becomes a really powerful way to focus where are you going to apply these, what kind of true ROI are you going to get? Are you going to drive down cost, drive growth up, improve your company's valuation? That's a much easier, straightforward, a much more straightforward way to plan a realistic ROI.
You're right. I think I look at it from cost containment of large organizations with data intensive, manual, mundane tasks with smart people that can be replicated. You can see that. I guess my question is more directed at the company that wants to, the traditional mechanical company that wants to morph into this services world. And that's just a huge leap. And we're still trying to figure it out, right? I don't expect an answer, but how do you, when you're looking at the business model shift for those traditional guys in a commoditized markets, whether they be kind of very, very pumps, fans, and motors, okay, you can digitize them, but also it's also disrupting what they've always done for sales. They go through the channel and those traditional relationships. So there's a lot of changes going on with digital enablement that are causing people to hesitate because they haven't hired like hundreds and hundreds of software engineers. They don't have experience with it. They're too expensive. They don't get it. They're hard to find. And it's very, very opaque. We can't quite put our finger on it. So, I mean, I just love to hear from thought leadership from people like yourselves. How do you start? And I know we hear about small experiments and these things. There's a lot of forces coming at play, and there's no better way other industry to look at it than the car industry, right? I mean, it's going through massive changes, and all, the tide rises all ships. We're all getting better cars out of it. So,
one thing that we've observed, right? You mentioned sales. I think a lot of and you asked the question about like what is digital. And I kind of, in my view, that starts with human experience, right? It's the digital economy is more about people than technology in the end. And so I think where companies might, get in trouble is to forget that where the people are in the loop. Salespeople, in my experience, they like selling stuff. So they're actually probably more attuned to what the market wants and needs, to what humans want and need, the people that they're looking at in the eye, trying to make a sale, trying to close something about, moving from, like you said, moving from kind of pure industrial economy models to a more software and services-based model. The fact of the matter is that clients, their customers, if the salesperson can bring a better solution to market, there's not an inhibitor. It's actually, it's growth, right? That salespeople, in my experience, they love that, right? If there's something new, it's different. They're not just competing on price. They actually have a new offering. And companies like Cognizant and others, Cognizant isn't the only one, although we do it pretty well, we help create service models based on things, right? Once you sensor enable packaging equipment, for example, then you can absolutely begin to license that out. You can sell it on a throughput model. You can ensure uptime. You can do a lot once you've got the data coming off the thing, right? That was the first book we read. The Code Halos book was all about how do you put a sensor on every person, every noun, every person, place, or thing, and then create a business model on the back of that. And that's exactly what's happening. And it's certainly happening more and more in the industrial Internet of Things space, where space as a service or uptime as a service. Those are product offerings that the people love, right? If you're guaranteeing, a lack of downtime, there's not a salesperson in the world that's in that space that isn't going to go, yeah, I can sell that all day long. And so whether or not you have to own your own software engineering capability, probably some is a good idea, but you don't need to own everybody to be able to create those models. What you do need to do if you're an industrial company is to be able to imagine a future where that is much more software and services enabled. But once you get there, then you're saying, okay, well, how do I create a process or experience that people really, really want that is related to uptime in a manufacturing environment that requires sensor enablement and software that drives human experiences, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the human that's going to make the decision, not the machine. But the machines now that are creating data that create, either uptime or even new service models, that's absolutely a shift that is gaining in momentum across the market.
It is gaining. There is some, we compete in a vibration space, and it can be vibration as a service because we're getting to the point that, humans also can't interpret all these squiggly lines all the time. All these worker bees in the industrial plant aren't data interpreters and no visualization, but what they do want is tell me what to do. Tell me what to do after we have vetted that technology and we know that what your recognition of your AI and your faults are and the data coming in, and this is the right sensor data. So it's just starting to shift, which is exciting because you never know. Is this going to be 5 years or 10 years?
Exactly.
Paul, I just wanted to get your opinion on how do you deal with extracting value from data, right? I mean, the usual, C-level notion is that if we have a lot of historical data, then probably there is some treasure underneath that. This notion about, drowning in data yet starving for information. What do you think are the best practices for extracting value from data?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And you're absolutely right. We see that all the time. Hey, we've got decades worth of data. It's got to mean something, right? There's a pony in there somewhere. Help us find it. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. But the first kind of no regrets decision around data, value extraction from data, is really modernizing the data. So modernizing the data architecture, because you're right. I mean, most companies, if you've been around for more than a decade, you've got massive amounts of data, but it's everywhere. It's like Lego blocks across the floor. So, some of it's going to be in a database, and some of it's going to be, at the edge. Some of it's going to be in a spreadsheet that somebody has on a server somewhere. Some of it's going to be in PDFs. It's going to be everywhere. And so that becomes really difficult to apply any new technologies to improve any experience. So having data in a modernized format where you have accessibility to AI systems, for example, that becomes a force multiplier. The data modernization of being able to say, okay, what's in here? Right? That first step is to really put it in the format that makes it much more accessible. So you can begin to visualize it. You can begin to apply AI or any new technology, right? Any new kind of analytics capability or machine learning. It's really hard to do that unless the data is in a format so a human isn't guessing anymore. That first no regret step in terms of valuation is first get it into a structure where you can access it. So the idea that you can just point to this pile of data that you've collected over the last 10 or 20 or 50 years and say, I got to believe there's something in there. There might be, but the first step to extracting that, which is an absolute necessity, I think, to compete in the digital economy, is to understand what you have and then put it into a format that you can then deploy it. You can apply it. You can make some decisions on it. You can figure out what the next best action is. You become a more, not cognizant company. You're cognizant of what your data is telling you. And once you do that, then you can become truly modern. You can extract data because you know what you have. You also know what you don't have. You might be making some assumptions that, hey, I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but by the way, you might be missing a lot on something related to a human experience, or the data isn't in a format that the AI bots can actually ingest and make meaning of. You can't do predictive analytics on certain things. So that first step to extract value is really to look at what you've got and then put it into a modern, accessible data architecture.
Mm-hmm. Paul, can you talk about the relationship between the digital transformation and data science as a field?
Yeah, I mean, data scientists are they are, I would say, the master builders of the digital economy, being able to manipulate that data, right? We just talked about modernizing data. That's where the data scientists come in and create the architectures and then begin to, understand what are the right questions to ask, first of all, and then how do we use the data that we have or the data that we can get to answer the questions we need. So, your question around the relationship of between kind of the digital transformation, so changing a company to become, in our words, modernized, right? Data scientists are front and center on that. All the way from data modernization to being able to apply operations intelligence against, the middle and back office work, being able to extract and deploy the data off of every connected thing, understanding the data that's can be gathered from every consumer or customer interaction. If you're a data scientist, the future's never been more bright. The trick is the machines are getting better and better, so the data scientists actually have to become more literate in how do you connect humans to technology, right? So there is a technical element there that's not going to go away probably ever, but there's also a growing demand of how do you connect data to human experience. And so the data scientists that can do that, that can use data to understand more and more what humans want and humans need in real time, that's going to be a fantastic contribution to the overall economy, and it's going to be a lot of fun as a career.
Paul, I just had one point in there. I mean, this is my experience has been when in the industrial IoT, we have data scientists that even if you can assume that they're making a good model that is created from a machine learning perspective and maintained and deployed, they don't know industrial equipment, right? They don't know these faults, and it's kind of a expert rule-based system as opposed to unsupervised learning in a way, although we want to get to unsupervised learning and seeing some of these weak signals and weak patterns and piles of data. My experience has been, as you're saying, this kind of human process, human flow, how the work orders are being, generated and acted upon today. And it was the point of getting kind of a data architect, a data scientist, and a subject matter expert domain person and a services person in a room and letting them hash it out. I mean, I feel like the market has kind of let the data scientists go a little rogue, and I think they need to be reined in based upon business value and value creation. That has been my experience. So this notion of a data translator and communicator between these various constituencies is getting to be vital. But often the HR people are just looking for what kind of machine models have you built, or you see your code on GitHub, and it's kind of missing the point again. Just like we were saying, a little bit off center or a blind spot when we're talking about digital transformation. We have to understand how all these systems and people interact and what is going to be the end result or deliverable or process out of it. And I don't know if you have some comments there.
I think your observations are exactly right. I don't know if I'd use the word rogue, but I think, know, it's certainly a gap. I would say it's certainly a gap. But also, right, we've just completed a study that we're getting ready to release where we looked across a lot of different sectors in terms of what we call digital maturity. So how well are you actually deploying, quote unquote, digital technologies like, AI and IoT and so on and so forth. And the manufacturing companies actually came out, not surprisingly, really, they came out behind some of the other industry sectors in terms of how mature they are overall. So we can look at that and say, well, that's their mistake, but I don't think that's true at all. I think they don't want to be early adopters for some really, really good reasons, right? Because if you're trying to, if you're operating on industrial equipment, there's some big risks, right, that you don't have if you're, running a technology platform, right? Downtime it's not only super expensive, but if something breaks, it's dangerous, right? And you can do a lot of damage with technologies that are not fit for purpose for an industrial situation where there's industrial equipment, there's a shop and a factory floor. There's a lot of risks there. So you could look at it and say, well, manufacturing is a little bit behind, and so the data scientists have kind of roamed, free range. But on the other hand, I do think it's just early days, and now that these technologies are less theoretical, they are more hardened, they are unequivocally more secure, more reliable, and the technology and the sensor technology and the batteries continue to improve, day over day, really. I think there's a lot more opportunities for the industrial Internet of Things to really take off even more than it already has, right? And as well with 5G connectivity, it opens up a whole new set of options for any kind of industrial activity to be much more enhanced with technology, right? Lower cost, keeping everything running, so improving uptime, and also being seen as fit for purpose for the modern economy, right? And particularly companies that are publicly traded, there's a new requirement now to be seen by the market as taking the right steps to be more relevant in the fourth industrial revolution. Whether you're in manufacturing or banking or retail, doesn't matter. So I think we could be entering a much more steep uptake of new technologies for driving business in every manufacturing company or a company that has manufacturing as part of its value chain.
Paul, I think you spoke about this a little bit before when we were talking about best practices for extracting value from data. Can you speak a little bit about enterprise siloed data?
I think we covered most of it. I mean, it's a huge problem, right? Companies that are reluctant to first put humans at the center, right? Because human experiences drive growth, and it's human experiences that drive costs down as well. Companies that are unwilling to do that, then you risk leaving data in different silos, right? You've got your finance data here, you've got your HR data here, you've got your process data here, you've got your customer data in another spot. But once you focus on, say it's a customer experience you're addressing, that once you focus on that experience, whether banking or retail or medical, doesn't matter. But once you focus on that experience, then the rest of it becomes a requirement, right? It becomes an imperative. If we're going to improve this healthcare experience, we need all of this data within the, respecting, of course, the security, privacy, compliance, and regulatory constraints. Then pull the data to improve that experience. That's a way to break down the silos, because you can just go across your firm and say, look, we need to improve this experience. If we do that with this software and this applied intelligence, we need this data, we're going to get this kind of economic impact. This is what we need to do. My experience, and most people in most companies are trying to do the right thing. There's not a benefit to being kind of proprietary maintaining proprietary control over some kind of data if it's going to improve the business. It just needs to be made clear that it's not going to improve risk. It shortens the time between ideation and value, and that you're going to ultimately serve the people that you're trying to serve. I think that's one way to kind of crack that nut, because you're exactly right. If the data does exist but it's not accessible, then it might as well not exist. Well, most of the leaders that I work with and we work with, everyone's mostly trying to do the right thing for clients and the business. And so it comes down to what's the narrative you're trying to express and how are you trying to improve something using these experiences. And then that has a tendency to kind of open minds and break down silos that exist for what were good reasons, but now they're not so much anymore.
What's your opinion on, how should enterprises be using ML and AI, and especially with the fact that there's a lot of assumptions about what AI can do, and there's no reality check in terms of the real capabilities of AI. And also, how do you balance this AI biases as well? How do you prevent that from happening?
Well, those are two big ones. So I think for any specific technology, whether it's AI and ML or blockchain or quantum computing or whatever the technology is, it really does come down to what's the outcome you're looking for aligned to a process or experience. Are you trying to drive growth, contain costs, improve valuation, or some variation of those? And I think once you have that as your target, right, and really authentically and thoughtfully triage, like this is a good opportunity from a business perspective, then you can figure out what can the machine do and what can't the machine. And that becomes a much more near-term way to apply existing AI and ML. And building that muscle, being able to go process by process, experience by experience around the value chains of an enterprise, then you're focusing on those experiences and those business outcomes. And you're focusing on the human experience and then pulling in the appropriate technology rather than saying, what do we do with blockchain? Well, I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to do. Or AI, or pick your technology. The real critical thing that winners are doing, people that are companies that are succeeding in the early innings of the digital economy, is they're putting humans first. They're putting that human experience to drive business outcomes, and then deciding what technologies need to be deployed to get that business outcome through a beautiful experience. Now, your second question was around bias in AI, and I think it's not just me. You can check out Jaron Lanier, Noel Yuval Harari. They're talking about how are we building tools. Humans have built tools since there were humans. So whether it's sharpened sticks and rocks, all the way to Python and R and quantum computing, those are all tools for productivity improvement. Ultimately, that's what it is. And when we build these tools, we do encode ourselves, our values into them. And with AI, the risk of unintended consequences is extraordinarily high. It requires us, as people designing and implementing these systems, to have bias at the front of the discussion all the way through the end-to-end life cycle of building out an AI solution, for example. So there are plenty of examples where companies have tried something and machines have behaved really badly. Because the unintended consequences was that we encoded racism or sexism or just stupid into these machines. So on the one hand, we're inventing this as we go. But on the other hand, I don't think we should let ourselves off the hook. We need to absolutely make it a part of the process. And big companies, I think, are beginning to recognize that this is part of the imperative related to AI. It needs to be made a part of the process, that we actively root out and eradicate unintended consequences so that we're actually encoding our better angels and not letting things go bananas and creating systems where we are marginalizing different communities or we are unintendedly harming groups. So it is absolutely, just as security, privacy, and compliance are a part of building these systems, rooting out unintended bias has to be embedded into every AI system that gets stood up.
That's really fantastic, Paul.